This is my work. These works along here, that's Robert Motherwell, and he's the artist that I chose. Many of the other artists, as you have already acknowledged, chose multiple artists and represented them. I was sort of simplistic in that I wanted to choose someone's work who I was familiar with and had been familiar with for a very long time. As my artist statement says, I went to the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, both for undergraduate and graduate work. And then I also got my doctorate in educational administration and went back to the Art Institute. As an intern between the museum and the school. And so I have a really long, maybe 35-year history with the School of the Art Institute. And then afterwards, I also began teaching there as well. Let's see, where was I? Anyway, I chose one artist, Robert Motherwell. When I was at the School of the Art Institute, it was early on in my career and theirs as well. I started classes in the basement of the Art Institute itself. That was before the Art Institute actually was built for the school. The school actually started the museum itself. And so I got there in the beginning, and then when I was finishing my graduate work, I went back, and they were in a debate between the museum and the school. The school wanted to expand and accept more artists, and the museum said, you know, we're paying all your bills. We pay the lights, you know. And if you move from this location, you can't use the name, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And they said, well, that'll never work because we started the museum, so you can't kick us out. So in any case, there were some discussions back and forth. Hopefully I was helpful in that decision, and they were able to come to a good meeting of the minds where they understood the value of both. And so they created a whole new institution on the other side of the tracks behind the Art Institute, and then have now, I think, 10 or 12 other buildings in the downtown area in which they have studios for the artists. But after I got out of school, I went into work in museums, the Art Institute for one, the Field Museum of Natural History, and the Museum of Science and Industry, as a coordinator for various events, special events at those institutions. And I taught at various colleges, an HBCU in Norfolk, Virginia, a historically black institution. And just recently at Laney College in Oakland and Berkeley City College in Berkeley, California. And I just retired in 2018. So it was about at that time that I began to really create my own work again. I had been busy teaching and administrating and doing all of these academic pursuits. And at the same time, I really wanted to get back at the love that I had in the very beginning. And so this last fall and winter, Claude and I had the opportunity to go to the David Lewis Gallery because it was closed for the winter. And we used their gallery space to create larger works than our basement would allow. So many of these came from that space. And it reminded me of other artists. I mean, this whole opportunity of seeing the various artists that are both exhibiting here and have donated work or have given work to get a real broad idea of what's going on here in the Hamptons. And it's illuminating, and it's a wonderful experience, and I think Parrish is great. You know, it takes a lot of energy to run a museum or a gallery and to keep people coming and interested. When I worked at the Field Museum, one of the first things they asked me to do was they said, you know, we want a questionnaire. We want a questionnaire, you know, to give to the visitors. I said, well, what do you want to know? And he said, well, we don't know what we want to know. We want you to design this and find something out for us. So I said, okay, well, nobody can do more than 10 questions, and so I'm going to answer these simple questions. But ironically, this is in the 1980s, I asked one question that ended up being so informative, I had no idea, and that was, what is your zip code? Because it let them know that 75% of the people who were coming to the museum were not from Illinois at all. Most of them are from international ports. So they began to create more visibility in the city and getting more individuals to come to the institution that was there for them. So that was a good thing. But while I was at the Art Institute, it makes it sound like I did nothing else, but I used to walk by the galleries on my way to class, and Robert Motherwell's work, huge work, was on the wall, and I really loved the way that his movement was, the play of darks and lights, and the minimalism, of his work, and the sort of spontaneity. And so I chose his work because it sort of reflected mine in a way. The first work is called The Curtain, and it really was based on something I was thinking about, Venus Cupid falling in time. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the basis of it is that in time, the curtain is drawn away. In time, everything is revealed. And so that's sort of where that was coming from. Altered Horizon was another work that, just sort of came spontaneously. But at the same time, it was very interesting for me because I was going through a magazine or a book or internet or someplace. I'm looking at other images. And I saw this, sort of image from afar, and it looked sort of like that. And I said, how did they get my painting in here, right? And I took a closer look, and what it was a series of 4 or 5 rows of slaves. And you could see them all the way back to the horizon. And it reminded me of that same kind of juxtaposition of darks and lights. You don't really know what's going on, but at the same time, there's a certain kind of energy and movement that's projected in that. And this one is called The Fourth Coming. They have the second coming. I'm on my fourth, so, so that's where, sort of that came from, sort of, simple, different directions, different moods, and movement again.
You paint in different colors as well?
I do, it's funny, when I first started painting, I've always been sort of an abstract expressionist. But those people who have seen my work from before know that that's not all I do. But I started out with experiences with like Sam Gilliam, who does these abstract paintings, that are sort of not stretched, but, kind of draped and so on. One of the artists that has a work here, Emilio Cruz, was a faculty member of mine when I was at the Art Institute, and he was an abstract expressionist, so his work here is very figurative, but from what I learned from him was a certain kind of respect for what paint will do, and just allowing it to kind of work through you as opposed to trying to manipulate it itself. Yeah?
The different looks on each one, though they're all related, what's your tool of choice?
Well, I use a lot, I was saying before, I use a lot of things that women traditionally use. I use forks, I use combs, I use brushes, I use mops, I use buckets, I use squeeze bottles like, my mother used to use when she was dyeing her hair. So all of those things, that you would normally find in a household are things that I used as opposed to, just brushes. But I use anything. Sometimes it's twigs. Sometimes it's not even paint. Sometimes it's coffee or tea stains or, whatever. Pomegranate juice is good.
Do you work on the wall or on the floor?
I start on the floor. I start working on the floor. because I can work around it. And I guess I've always worked that way. I've never really worked on an easel, not really, particularly for larger pieces because I can walk around it and I can take off my shoes and walk through it. It allows me to be able to make decisions about lights and darks as opposed to how they relate to one another, as opposed to trying to force it to be something.
I'm curious also, I mean, well, a lot of your work is black and white and any shade in between.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very intrigued by this work with the blue-gray stain. And how, first of all, why did you choose that color and how did you create that sort of drip?
This,
Yes.
how did I create it?
Yeah.
I did it on the ground first, right?
Okay.
Then I tacked it to the wall, and then I dripped paint down to the point that I made sure that it went all the way down, and then I used combs and forks and so on to create a certain kind of, sort of like, what do you call those patterns when they cardiogram? Sort of electrocardiogram. So, you have a certain kind of movement and energy. And it's going in a different direction than the others. And it's also, sort of, like wind, but not quite.
So when you begin your creative process on the ground, do you know what top and bottom is going to be from the beginning, or do you just
Yeah,
kind of work
usually.
until, okay.
Usually I start, I'll lay out the canvas, and depending upon, what size it is, however I want to see it. And I kind of just wait until it shows me what I'm going to do. Yeah, and I start from there. Yeah.
Is there also a time frame when you're working? Can you leave something for quite a while and come back and revisit it, or do you feel that there's a sense of that you're in motion?
Mostly I finish a work from beginning to end in one fell swoop. There may be times when I have to stop because it's wet and I can't do anything more until it dries. And then after it dries, then I can hang it up and work in it some more or finish it. But many times after I hang it up, I was like, well, it's done. This is what it's supposed to be. Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit about your own physicality and how that changes with each of the paintings? It just feels like there's so much movement in some of these and some of these are more static. And I just wonder, are you listening to something? How are you working with these as you move around them? And how much of your own physicality do you think it takes to actually make these paintings?
Well, it was interesting. A cousin of mine came and said something about, oh, you must be up on the ladder, just. And I'm like, no. No. It's, sometimes it takes a lot, of actual energy. Sometimes I'll come home and I'm like, oh, man, I've been doing this all day, But generally speaking, it's such a joy to be doing it for me that whatever it is that, I'm, losing energy-wise in the making is for good purpose. And so, it's not a bother.
You paint with music?
Huh?
You paint with music?
What?
With music.
Oh, with music. Oh, yeah. There's always music. Sometimes I listen to Brazilian music. Sometimes, I'm listening to jazz. But, it's sort of like that. I mean, music that, in a way, I don't quite understand. I mean, I don't speak Portuguese or, you know what I mean? But it has a certain kind of tonal quality. It has a certain kind of rhythm and balance. And the mood is good. And so, yeah. So I play music.
How do you decide when you're finished?
Excuse me?
How do you decide when you're finished?
How do I decide when I'm finished? I guess when, I can't do any more. It's, sometimes if something is not quite the way that I want it, I'll just kind of leave it alone for a while. And many times when I come back to it, I understand why I left it alone. And it is supposed to stay that way. Yeah, so that's basically what happens with me. Yeah. Yeah.
Is drawing ever a part of that kind of beginning process for you as a preparatory step?
Drawing? No. No, the drawings are actually finished works. You know, if I'm doing, you know, I work on paper, but it's really very spontaneous. I'm not really thinking about what I'm doing, I'm just letting it happen and, you know, seeing the results. And sometimes, like I said, you know, I have to manipulate a little bit or, you know, tear it up and throw it out.
I was just going to ask that. Is that
Yeah, I mean, you know, artists, you know, are supposed to have the privilege of, you know, making bad art every once in a while so that they learn from that, you know, so that they can do better the next time. And that's all part of the growing process in creating work. You know, and sometimes your mistakes are your biggest successes.
And I guess sometimes you just lose, at least I'm thinking myself, so you lose the process of where you were going. You know, you're suddenly 2/3 of the way and
Yeah, well, you know, I don't know where I'm going.
oh, so
You know, I'm letting the road just kind of roll out in front of me, you know, and I'm just walking along, you know, in its stead. I tried to make work, and in some ways I still try to make, because I said, you know, I do a series of collages, silks, printed collages, you know, that were created digitally for a series that I did on the Tulsa, Oklahoma race massacre in 1921. And I do drawing. Somebody just asked me to do some, you know, illustrations for a little story. And so, you know, I know what they're looking for, and I know how to do it. It's not necessarily, it's like my taxes. I'd rather give it to somebody else to do, right, rather than do it myself. But, you know, it's a process, you know, and once you know how to do it, then it becomes easier the next time. And you remember those things that you did that you thought were mistakes, and you use them in the future for the next round of work that you do. So, and I just keep working. And it's fun, and I like it.
Wonderful. I'm curious about this one because that's very different from the three that you have up.
Yeah, somebody asked me about color, you know. Yeah, and so this one's untitled, but, you know, it's sort of interesting to me because I've always been accused of sort of telling stories without words. And in a way, I think some of my scribblings, my writings in there, came from a time when I was living in North Africa. And so, you know, the Arabic languages, you know, it's not from left to right, it's from right to left. And, you know, you have a lot of different kinds of marks. And even though I don't speak Arabic, shwiya, and I don't write it for sure, but it created a certain kind of energy and motion. And in a way, it was one of my instructors, who I was talking about before, said something to me one time about the fact, he says, oh, you know, your work is sort of like a letter you get in the mail, and you're excited about getting the letter in the mail, but you see who it's from and you're not really quite sure, and you open it up and, you know, the letter comes out and chokes you or kills you or something like that, right? I was like, what? You know, right? What do you mean, you know? And so in a way, I understand that now, because some of the things that I create, they draw you in because of the color. They're very pastel-y and kind of nice. But the subject matter is so intense that you almost are shocked when you realize what you're looking at. And so that kind of plays with a lot of my work. You know, it says one thing in just looking at it, and it says something else, you know, when you understand what the motivation was or the inspiration was that created it.
You said you went to the Middle East?
Hmm?
You were North Africa, sorry.
Yeah.
This one?
In Morocco. Yeah, I lived in Morocco and Casablanca for 2 years. Huh?
They invited you,
I was in graduate school. I had an opportunity to go. My sister was there. I got a chance to work at the American Embassy, teaching English as a foreign language. So I did 1 year of my graduate program in North Africa. You know, that's the problem with going to the same school consecutively, is that you really need some outside inspiration. And so that gave me what I needed. And so when I got back, you know, I was ready to graduate. And they said, oh no, you have to stay on campus at least 1 semester before you graduate. So yeah, but there it was. It was a wonderful experience. And I travel a lot.
No, it's because you can see the difference, you can see the influence, you can see something else is going on there.
Yeah. And it's got a little color.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.